With us this week is F1 veteran Ed Tate. Ed, you started off in, so long ago, 1986.
1986, yes.
Working for Goodyear's, wasn't it? Now, before you start,
Yes.
how did you get the job in the first place before you tell us what you did?
I'd been offered, an old family friend of ours was the assistant team manager of Goodyear. He'd worked at Goodyear for many, many years, really, since he went from school. And of course, Goodyear was based in Wolverhampton. And I'd seen him sort of traveling the world, I think from about 79, 1980, something like that. He'd been working on the race team. And he'd said to me on several occasions, would I like a job in F1? And I says, no, thank you very much. And as much as I sort of envied the travel that he was doing, F1 really didn't hold any, I wasn't really interested in it. I was more interested in my music and other things that I was up to. But,
you're a drummer,
pardon?
You're a drummer, aren't you, saying that?
Yeah. I've been playing drums since I was about sort of 6 or 7 years old, really. So
right. We're coming to that later.
Yeah, we will. But no, I'd been sort of doing different things with my bands and that, and as you know, you always get with the low level that we were at, you never make any money at it. So Tony, our friend, he said to me, he says, Ed, he said, do you fancy sort of earning a few quid? He says unloading tyres at Goodyear, the race tyres, because what it was, all the race team were over in Montreal for the Grand Prix, and of course all the Goodyear tyres were manufactured in Akron in is it Ohio? I think it is. Yeah. So and then all the tyres were shipped over to Wolverhampton because a lot more races were in Europe in those days. So anyway, he said, if you want to come and unload some containers and put them in the warehouse and all that kind of thing. He says it's just a cash in hand job. And I says, yeah, okay. So I went along and emptied these containers, and then all the guys came back from Montreal, and they said, would you like to come to a test at Silverstone to, start fitting some tyres? And I said, well, I'm not doing much else. Why not? I may as well. So we jump in the minibus from Wolverhampton down to Silverstone. And bearing in mind, I've had no interest in motor racing whatsoever, really. I was aware of people like James Hunt and Jim Clark and Jackie Stewart and that. But the first thing that I did when I got there to Silverstone, the first engine that I heard running up was the Lotus Renault, and it was Senna's car. And I was suddenly almost like transfixed with it, really. I thought, blimey, this is a completely different world. And from then on in, we fitted the tyres for the test, everything like that. I will say about this one as well, I don't want to sort of go on about one particular incident and that, but this test was the first time that Frank Williams had actually been back to a race circuit since his accident at coming away from Paul Ricard.
Yeah.
And Frank got wheeled in.
Was this just a one-day test?
Yeah, it was just a 1 day. Or maybe. No, it might have been a 2-day test. It was the general sort of tyre test before the Silverstone Grand Prix.
Yeah, I remember.
But they wheeled Frank in his wheelchair, and he looked awful. Which we all know that the struggles Frank's had all his life ever since then. But he really looked bad. But I remember him, Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet both sort of had the pictures taken with him and everything. And then suddenly, they'd been doing the tests and that, but then a call had come into into the circuit, that there'd been an accident on, I'm not sure if it was the M40 back then, but anyway, there'd been an accident locally and they needed a helicopter. And somebody knew that Nigel Mansell had come to the circuit in his helicopter. So at lunchtime at Silverstone, Nigel shot off and flew his helicopter to this accident on the motorway, and helped transfer the patients or the victims and that from that accident, I think, to John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. And he came back sort of a bit later in the afternoon, put his overalls back on, jumped in the car, and off he went. So so from that test, the next thing I know, I'm in the minibus heading down to Paul Ricard for the '86 Grand Prix, and that was it. That was my first race. And
so now you're on the race team.
Yeah, I'm on the race team.
Just like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they got how it worked at Goodyear. They got about, I think, 6 full members, employees of Goodyear, and during the season, then they took on sort of temporary guys, and of which I was one of those. And we stayed, for the rest of the season. But like the other guys, they come out of sort of road car tyre building, or they were truck drivers, or one or two had worked on the rally team as well. So, but that was right. That was what we were.
Right. Yeah. So, well, that was what, the summer of '86. So you did it all the way through '86.
Yeah, I did every race in '86. I mean, off the top of my head now, I think we did the French Grand Prix, then the British, then what was it? Hungary, Germany, and Austria, or whichever way those guys came through. Yeah, Monza, Portugal, Mexico, and Australia.
Right, because Australia used to be at the end of the season.
That was. There was never a better race than the Adelaide Grand Prix.
Absolutely, yeah. So listen, when you putting the tyres on the rims, what were you putting inside them?
What, as in to blow them up? Nitrogen. When I started, it was air. And as I remember now, it's a long time ago, but I think partially through that season, we started using nitrogen. And I believe that what happened was the Goodyear sort of compressors and inflation equipment was, I mean, a lot of that gear was it was all a bit Heath Robinson. And what you used to get with the compressors, although you got vapor traps on and water traps, you used to get a lot of moisture in the air, that the compressors were generating. And we were told that what happened as well sometimes was certainly with the qualifying tyres. I mean, we used to run sort of like 5 compounds at that time, and the designated E compound at any circuit was a 1-lap qualifier. So that's all they were good for. And then they would come in and they would be completely blistered and they were ragged. But I remember hearing that one of the reasons for using nitrogen, because it's obviously a very, very dry, it's an inert gas, it's a dry gas. There was no moisture in it, because what seemed to be happening was little sort of drops of moisture would get inside the carcass of the tyre, and when it heated up, it would boil, and the engineers thought that helped contribute to some of the blisters. But so after that, and I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'll stand corrected by other people if they know better, but I'm pretty sure that in '86 that was when nitrogen really started to get used as the standard. So
it didn't make it. Did it make the tyres run better or something, or was it just purely for this moisture?
Well, I think it stabilised the pressures. You know, there wasn't the fluctuation in the pressures of the tyres, because I mean, drivers like Senna, they could tell across the corners of the car. They could tell between like half a pound of psi if there was any difference in the cars and that. And the other thing as well, obviously, with the I'm not probably maybe 84 that they really started coming onto radial tyres. Well, those were a lot more stable in because when they used to use the cross plies, I mean, cross plies used to expand, and you'd get, you know, as the heat was generated by the tyres, the tyres would grow. And because they were obviously, you know, a different construction, but with the radials, they were much more of a stable designer tyre. And you know, I'm not, as I say, there's going to be experts come and watch this and say, no, he's wrong about that. But, you know, I'm pretty sure what I say is roundabout on the mark.
So it gets to the end of the season. So were you sort of staff at that point at Goodyear, or were you like freelance, just employed for the race season?
Yeah, I was employed for the, you know, for the season, but all the hope was always that you'd carry on. But what happened at that particular time was, I mean, I'll come on to the Australian race in a minute, but there'd been a lot of talk about Goodyear being taken over. And I think there was a bid, almost like a hostile bid or something, put in from James Goldsmith to buy the whole of Goodyear. And what happened was Goodyear, as a global company, had to pull in a hell of a lot of money to ward off this takeover bid. And consequently, that meant that they had to, you know, really rein in their horns on all their racing activities. And Formula One was a victim of that. So at the end of '86, Goodyear actually pulled out of F1. And that meant, you know, that all of us guys were out of work. I think that was possibly a bit of a relief to some of the management there, because probably the best way of saying it, we were a bit of a rum bunch, and it was what we sort of worked hard and played even harder, and I think they looked at it with a bit of a sigh of relief, because then in '87 they decided, I mean, this takeover bid was warded off, and they decided to come back into F1. So there was never really quite, you know, a season's break in it or anything like that. But when we all sort of wanted to, you know, get our jobs back and that, certainly the temps, you know, we were sort of, it was thanks for your help in the past, lads, but we go. But no, I suppose really the abiding memory of many people of that particular season was Nigel Mansell's tyre blowing up in Adelaide. And I actually remember fitting all of the Williams race tyres for that meeting. Because what used to happen, all the teams would bring the tyres over sort of on a Thursday. You'd fit up probably 450 tyres for all the different teams on a Thursday. And you were allocated different teams to do. So, you know, all the tyres that come through into the fitting area, and you would get sort of, you know, one guy would be fitting all the Williams stuff, then he'd do the McLaren stuff. And usually if you played up at some stage, they gave you the Lotus Speed lines or the Zac Speed wheels, and whichever. Which, bear in mind, we used to fit these tyres manually, and there was no automatic fitting machines or anything like that. And we used to fit these tyres on what we used to call the Iron Maiden, which was basically, you know, it was almost like a big heavy steel cotton reel thing with a pole. You drop the wheel over the top and then fit your tyres. Well, I mean, I'm only 5'7", so some of those rear tyres were very difficult for me to lift up and actually.
They were massive back then, weren't they?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. Well, they were 18-inch. They were 18-inch tyres, you know, and I found it sort of, you know, it was hard work. I think I put 2 inches on my chest during the sort of the 9 races that I did. But anyway, I remember fitting those Williams tyres, and we went through the weekend, and then what happens after you know, of course there used to be a Sunday morning warm up for half an hour, 4 hours before the race. Then what would happen then is the engineers would say they'd select the tyres that they wanted for to start the race, and then for the first pit stop and what have you. Of course, after the warm up, they'd bring those tyres back to the fitting area, and we'd check all the balances on them as well, just to make sure that everything was okay. But the race went off, and I ended up in the back of the Williams garage, because as Goodyear guys, unless you were the actual, you know, management or the American race engineers, you weren't allowed in the pit lane most of the time or on the grid. So, you know, we were hovering about at the back of the garages. And I remember standing watching the race with actually Roseanne Mansell, his wife, and a guy called Sheridan Thin, who was he was like a sponsorship manager, or Nigel's manager. But anyway, of course, and then we were watching the TV, and we saw Rosberg's tyre blow up, and suddenly there was a, you know, almighty kerfuffle running around from the Goodyear guys. Nigel only needed to finish third in that race to win the World Championship, but Nigel being Nigel, he just had to blast on and try and win that race. And I've spoken to or chatted to Frank Durney about this, and I always seem to remember that after Rosberg's tyre had blown up, that they tried to get Nigel in on the next lap. But as he went past the pit board, he was obviously too late to come in the pit entrance. So he shot off on the next lap. And then, of course, we all know what happened then. His tyre let go. And he did well to keep that on the circuit. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. No, if he'd have stopped the car in the middle of the track, then they would have red flagged the race, because it was over 3/4 distance. And he would have won the World Championship. But that's it.
Unbelievable.
So yeah,
so,
we
did they have any of the Williams boys afterwards have a word with you at all?
Well, no, because it wasn't until probably a couple of years later. We were testing in Portugal, and Nigel came down the pit lane on his push bike, and we were standing mooching around or whatever, and Nigel came to have a chat, and he sort of recognised me from Goodyear, and we got talking. I says, "Yeah, Nigel," I says, "We well remember that tyre explosion in Adelaide," and he says, "Don't effing talk to me about that," you know. And I says, "Well," I have to admit to you now, I said, "It was probably me that fitted that tyre." And he grabbed me around the neck and threw me to the floor. But yeah, it was one of those things, you know. But yeah, it was. I suppose really it's sort of nice to be associated with a bit of an infamous incident like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So listen, before we get on to 87,
yeah,
when the tyres came back from a meeting,
Yeah.
And they go back to the factory.
Yeah.
You said you started off just stacking them up or whatever. But what happens to them after that? Are they recycled or melted down? Whatever. I've actually no idea what they do with them, even now.
There is a great big housing estate somewhere in Derbyshire that when you walk on it must bounce. Because when I was there, all of those tyres went to landfill. Yeah, and we used to load up the Arctics with all the scrub tyres, and we would take them up to this big, almost like a quarry type thing, great big hole in the ground, and chuck them all in. There were tens of thousands of them. I mean, you would have thought really at the time that a company like Goodyear would have a shredding plant or something like that they could. But no. Apart from one or two tyres that might get robbed for souvenir purposes or something like that. Yeah, the ubiquitous coffee table. No, most of those tyres went into landfill.
So saying that, then I don't really. What do they do with them now? Do they must recycle them and melt?
They must do now. I mean, I have no idea what they do with them now, Gary. I don't know. I mean, I did work for a short time for a Midlands company who supplied all the Avon tyres for historic Grand Prix and everything like that. I mean, we would sell new tyres to sort of like the well-heeled runners, and we'd sell the scrub tyres to the less well-heeled runners. So they were recycled that way, and it usually ended up with an extra bit of spending money in our back pockets as well.
Yes, fair play. Yeah. So listen, so 87.
Yeah.
So did you finish with Goodyear at the end of 86?
Yeah, the end of 86. That was it. We were sort of, we were given our marching orders really, and so I was. Because the thing at the time as well was most of the Goodyear drivers had HGV licenses, because that was really part of the job. I came into it a little bit later, and I'd not got an HGV. But I thought, well, if I want to continue in motor racing, which I actually did, I thought I need to go and get a Class 1 license. So at the start of 87, maybe February, March or something, it was obvious I wasn't going back to Goodyear. But I took my test to get a Class 1 license, and then went off to, get some experience really, just driving general haulage, delivering sprouts and spuds and all that kind of thing, and great big tins of catering baked beans, as I remember. But yeah. And then what you did, you sort of had a look around, because I thought, well, it's going to be difficult to get straight back into F1. So what you did back in those days was bought Autosport every Thursday, and started going through the job pages.
So Ed, when you say you wanted to get back into F1, do you mean on the tyre side or with a team?
Whichever really, but basically as a truckie. Because, I mean, back then, a truckie was, we had to sort of turn our hands to loads of different jobs. And, I mean, my experience at the time really was fitting tyres. But I didn't mind which way I was going to get back into it. But having a Class 1 HGV was my ticket to get back in. And also, it's one of those things in F1. Once you've been in it, you've always got more of a chance of getting back into it. You sort of
That's right.
You're in the family then.
Exactly. Yeah. So into 87. So you're still looking around for a work, and this is where John McDonnell comes into the picture, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I saw an advert for, as I say, in Autosport. Truck driver wanted for new F1 team,
Oh, okay.
So I thought, well, we'll have a go for that. I went down to Bicester to meet Mick Ralph. Now, obviously, Mick, Ralph, and John McDonald had been the Ram F1 team, Ralph and McDonald. And what they'd done was to try and they'd done a deal to run a Benetton BMW B186 or whatever it was, for about 5 races. And I don't know how many people know the story of this one, but in '87, the F1 Championship was split up between the turbo cars and a series, I think it was the Jim Clark Trophy or something like that, for normally aspirated engines, which was teams like Tyrrell, blimey, I can't remember now who else was running Cosworths and that.
It was sort of less well-off.
Pardon?
It was like the less well-offs.
Yeah, which, unfortunately, Tyrrell always seemed to be one of those perennial less well-off teams. Possibly Arrows. What was Arrows doing? No, they were running turbos, weren't they? I think. But but anyway, John had done a deal with Benetton to run this single car, and he got sponsorship from this Italian clothing company called Trussadi, and also it was being run by this Japanese company called Middlebridge Engineering. So the plan was to do the first race. I think it was at Monza, which was 3/4 of the way through the season. But I remember as well when I'd been to see Mick Ralph about getting the job as the truckie, which actually, he offered me the job straight away, which was fabulous. There was a guy stood in reception as I come out, and he got his suit on and his white tie and his briefcase and everything. He was obviously a driver, but it was Perry McCarthy, and Perry was he was obviously putting himself around to try and get a drive. And but anyway, I think the deal had been done to run this Italian guy called Emanuele Pirro, and so we got. I think there was 7 or 8, 9 of us. That was all, and we got this car, and the chief mechanic there was a fabulous guy called Dave Luckett, who, again, a lot of people who will probably watch this know Dave as the guy that was badly injured at Zolder in the start line accident with Patrese, and when Siggy Storr hit him at the start of the race, because Dave had jumped out. Patrase's car had stalled. Dave jumped out to try and start the car up just as the green flag dropped, and Dave was hit and badly injured, but he recovered from that. I mean, obviously, sadly, Dave passed away not very long ago, but he started getting all, looking at this car and getting, new bits made and everything, taken apart and crack checked and everything that you got to do. But was this
like a year-old car, or was it a new car?
Yeah, it was the car that won in Mexico in '86.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
Yeah, which was Berger and Fabi had been driving those cars, and of course the BMW was probably the most the most powerful engine on the grid. But then we started to hear that obstacles were being put in the way as far as running this car. I think people like Jackie Oliver and Ken Tyrrell sort of said, they objected to the fact that this car, which was potentially a race-winning car straight out of the box, they started protesting it and saying, oh, you know, they can't run this halfway through the season. And I mean, I don't know a lot of the politics that went on, but obviously Johnny Mack was pretty close friends with Bernie, and Bernie was trying to smooth the path. But in the end, we never got an ECU from BMW to run that engine. All I ever remember getting supplied was this 45-gallon drum of absolutely evil-smelling fuel. And but you know, apart from putting it into the car to make sure that the bag tank wasn't leaking, that was it. So consequently, that got scuppered. The doors were pulled down, and off we go into the distance, looking for more work. And but you know, Mick Ralph and Ray Bolter and I mean, one of the guys who was working on the Formula 4 2000 team at that time at Middlebridge was a guy called Ronnie Meadows, who's been sort of one of the Toto Wolff's head men at Mercedes now for a long, long time. He's been sporting director at BAR, Mercedes, and that. So Ronnie's done well, but I mean, at the time he was just like a junior mechanic and a bit of a, you know, he was learning his trade. But so as I say, Mick Ralph and Ray Bolter and that, they said keep in touch, and if anything happens for 88, then we'll give you a shout. But then it transpired coming into 88, because I went back on general haulage, and then got a call from Mick Ralph to say, are you interested in, we're going to be running 3 cars in Formula 3, in the British Formula 3 Championship. And I thought, well, that's not Formula 1, is it? You know, but I mean, it's back in racing. I mean, I was obviously got ideas above my station, because, I mean, the thing is with me, most people that get involved in motorsport, and certainly F1, have worked from the ground up. I worked from karting into Formula Ford, into Formula 4 2000, F3, F3000, then F1. I did it the other way. I started in F1 and worked
downwards.
So yeah, so Formula 3. I thought, well, yeah, let's give it a go. And so they'd set up, you know, they were going to run 3 cars, and we got a couple of English guys. One guy called John Alcorn, who I think had possibly won the Formula 4 2000 Championship the year before. A guy called Phil Andrews, who's a fella Brummie like myself, and a Belgian guy called Arnaud Guyot. And yeah, we went along and to the first race at Brands Hatch. I mean, we actually won it with John Alcorn. Pardon? They were Reynards. Reynard, I think the engine VW Spice, was it? Something like that at the time, yeah. I think it was, back in those days, it was obviously Reynards and Rolts who were, you know, they were the main cars. But yeah, I did the first race down there. Well, because, I mean, the year before at Middlebridge and working in Bicester, it was sort of like about 85 miles from my house. So what I tended to do during the week, we rented digs down there, you know, and I found a little place at RAF Bicester, who one of the ladies who, you know, she was in the RAF, and she got a room to rent and what have you. And so, you know, we lodged there during the week. But in 88, I'd heard that this guy was looking to, he's a youngish chap who was looking to rent a room out in his house. And I went along to meet him and met this big tall fella, and whose name was Nick Worth. And I ended up lodging with Nick, and there was another one of the mechanics from Middlebridge who was sharing another room. And we were there for a little while. Well, of course, Nick Worth was a young aerodynamicist working with Adrian Newey at March. And so Nick said to me, I remember he came back once, and I think they just handed out some team gear, and Nick had got this new Leighton House sweatshirt on, and I don't think he took it off for about 4 months. He was just, he just lived in the thing. I mean, he was so enthusiastic, and but I mean, Nick was a very, very clever guy, and but yeah, he said we got talking, and he said, Ed, he says, I don't know if you're interested. He says, but there's you're doing the F3 and that. He says, but there's a job as a truckie on the test team at March if you're interested. And I said, yeah. And I said, that'd be great, because I mean that's getting back into F1 then. So the March factory was literally 5 minutes walk from the Middlebridge factory. So Nick organised an interview for me, and I went round there to meet Robin Day, and Robin was in charge of the test team, and we sort of hit it off, because I'd known Robin from the year before with Brabham, or a couple of years before with Brabham, and so he gave me the job on the test team, and so that went on for a while, and then sort of like the test team start integrating with the race team a little bit more, and then I ended up on the race team.
Because I presume that March at that point, or was it called Leighton House March at that point?
Yeah, they were sponsored by Leighton House, because Akagi had got. I mean, they painted the car blue, the famous blue, in '87. And they'd run a modified Formula 3000 car, and for Capelli, just as a one car operation. But then Akagi put more money into it in '88, and I think it was part way through that season that a deal went through to call it Leighton House March. He put enough money in to sort of buy the naming rights of it, so to speak, and it went on from there. And of course, we had a fantastic season. I mean, McLaren won 15 out of the 16 races.
How many people on the team, Ed, at that point?
28.
God, that's not the same number that do a tyre change now.
Well, that's the same number that sort of they take to open cans of fizzy pop.
Let's not get into that.
I know, but no, it's but that's what we needed.
The entire race team, mechanics and truckies. How many truckies? 2 or 1?
4.
4. Okay.
4 truckies. We ran 2 Arctics, and we got 2 guys, two truckies on each truck.
But then you weren't just driving the truck, were you?
No. I mean, we would have, for instance, I'm looking at the 4 guys that we had at Leighton House at the time. I mean, there was myself. I was sort of, like a garage technician, so to speak. Really, we just helped set everything up. George Harding, who I used to run in the truck with, he was the same, but George was pretty good with as a clagman, on the carbon as what have you. So he used to do that in between, sort of emptying the bins around the place and just trying to keep the mechanics in order. Keith Biddy, he was the spares man, so he looked after all the race team spares. And then Mick Oxlade, or Moose, he was the tyre man. So, but we did, the 4 of us, and I mean, I'm not silly. We understand how much crap all these Formula 1 teams take around with them these days. But we had 3 cars and all the gear that we needed to go Grand Prix racing. It all went into 2 Arctics. Maybe we would take you know, like a small 7.5 tonner with spare bodywork in it and that kind of thing. But most of the time, that would sort of sit outside the circuit and just get used if we needed it. But yeah, I mean, each car had 3 mechanics on it. So you got 3 cars. So you've got 9 blokes. You've got your gearbox guy. You've got your electricians. You've got your fabbies. You've got, you know, I mean, one of the guys, Ian Stone, he did all the engine kitting. You know, he worked with Stan, with Judd, and that. Because of course, you know, we used to change a lot of engines. You know, it's not 3 for the season now. I mean, I'll come on to when I worked for Yamaha and that. I mean, it was usually 3 in the morning. But,
well, I was going to say, Beaky Sims has told me in the past that Lotus in the late 60s, you get through 3 engines in a day. Simple. Really
easily.
Yeah.
Well, of course, going back as well to, so like the turbo stuff, and like some of those hand grenade engines. I mean, they were really good for 2 or 3 laps, and then they would blow up. You know, they'd stick them up to about 5.5 bar boost or something like that, and they would just let them go. Well, of course, you'd put an engine in the factory, take it to the circuit, then you'd run that engine on a Friday, and then they would probably take it out overnight on Friday night and put a qualifying engine in. And then that engine would come out for the race. And you'd have the whole thing, you know, all ready to go. Race rear end on it, you know, with all the gearbox and all the suspension, blah, blah,
so
blah.
So the Friday engine would be the race engine. Is that right?
Sometimes. I don't know what... I mean, we just seem to change them at a hell of a frequency. We were running obviously Judds and that, and we didn't have qualifying spec engines. We just had some that might have been just, you know, a few extra horsepower that they'd seen on the dyno, but you know, that was it, or something that was actually running on 8 cylinders and not 7.
Yeah.
So I will defend Judd all the time, because, you know, I mean, bless him. I mean, if and I will link him to this. Old Stan Hall. He's been a good old pal for all the years and that. I mean, we always used to take the mickey out of him, because he'd turn up to the race meeting. Obviously, he'd have he'd ponce a bit of space in one of the toolboxes for his bits and pieces. But he used to turn up like with a Tesco carrier bag with a couple of spanners in it. And we used to say, you know, here comes the Judd engine division, engine mechanics.